Hello Internet, and welcome to the first episode of RTFM. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to play Twilight Imperium 3rd Edition, and not only that, I'm going to be doing it faster than anyone else online. I think. You may have noticed that the length of this video is longer than it says in the title. Well, that's because I'm going to say a few words before and after the actual rules explanation. But if you already know all about this game, feel free to press this button and skip right to the start. Still with me? Okay. Let me tell you a little bit about this game. Twilight Imperium is a space-based 4X game. Video game equivalents would be Civilization or the Endless series. Basically, you'll be playing one of 10 randomly assigned alien races vying for control of the galaxy. See, the old rulers of the Galactic Empire, the Lazaks, have been overthrown, and now the seat of their power, the planet Mechatol Rex, is up for grabs. Meanwhile, the Winarans, custodians of the Empire, are looking for a new race to rule, and you need to prove that you're the race to do it. You'll do that by building ships, researching new technologies, founding colonies, and fighting wars against other players, because of course, they want to rule too. Now, in case it isn't obvious, I love this game. I could go on for a long time about what makes it such a great game, but to be honest, a lot of people have done that before me. If you're looking for a good review, I recommend Shut 'Em and Sit Down's video. It's about 7 minutes long, it's really good, and while you're at it, just check out everything they do, because they're really good. Anyway, I'm not really here to review the game, I'm just here to teach you how to play it. So, with that in mind, and with the help of my friend Nick acting as the players, let's get down to some serious space business. During setup, each player will randomly select a home system, which will determine your race. For this video, you'll be playing as the Sardok Nor, a race of horrifying bug monsters, much like Vincent D'Onofrio in Men in Black. These are an easy race to start with because they only have one very useful special ability. After selecting races, each player grabs their home planet cards, secret objective card, trade agreements, technology deck, command counters, flags, and their ships. You'll be using your race sheet to help keep track of those command counters, but they'll also serve as a handy reference guide for the most commonly used information. For now, let's look at the starting units and technology section. This shows which ships you'll place in your home system at the start of the game and which technologies you start with. This is the galaxy we'll be using for this video. As you can see, there are 6 players, which is ideal for this game. There are optional rules for playing with fewer players, but they're easy enough to figure out that I'm just going to focus on playing with 6. The first part of the game is to create the galaxy itself, but I'm going to save that for the end of the video so you know why placement is important. All you need to know is that some systems are empty, most have planets, and some have some special rules. At the start of the game, you'll place command counters on your race sheet. 2 in strategy allocation, 3 in fleet supply, and 3 in the command pool. Don't worry about what these do for now, I'll get to that in a minute. Now let's talk about how you actually play the game. Each round of the game is split up into 3 phases: strategy, action, and status. Most of the game will take place during the action phases, so I'm going to focus on that first. During the action phase, each player will take turns doing one of 4 actions: strategic, tactical, transfer, or pass. Once you pass, you can't perform any more actions until the next round, but you can't pass until you've performed your strategic action. So with that in mind, let's talk about tactical actions. Okay, so like the action phase itself, tactical actions are what you're going to be spending most of your time doing. And there's a lot of things to do in it. 7 things, in fact, but that's fine. You're not going to do all 7 every time, and I'm going to take you through it, and it's going to be fine. Each step in the tactical action follows the activation sequence, which goes activate system, move ships, PDS fire, space battle, planetary landing, invasion combat, and production. Now, with the exception of the first step, all of these are conditional, but it will always start with activating a system, so let's do that. All you have to do is take a command counter from your command pool and place it on the system. Something to keep in mind is that if a system already has one of your command counters on it, you can't activate it again until that command counter is removed, which is usually at the end of the round. So you've activated a system. Now you're going to want to move some units into it. On your first turn, you're going to want to colonize the best planets around you, and you'll do that with your carrier and ground forces. Ground forces are needed to colonize other planets, but they can't move anywhere without a ship to carry them. Carriers are the workhorse of your fleet. They're not great in a fight, but they have an ability called Capacity 6, which means they can carry up to 6 ground forces, fighters, or planetary defense systems in any combination. So let's move a carrier with 4 ground forces and a PDS unit, and a cruiser, because why not, into this 2-planet system. Because there isn't anything to trigger steps 3 or 4 of the activation sequence, let's move on to step 5, planetary landing. Since there are no other units on these planets, it's really easy. Just choose the units to land and then take the corresponding planet cards and put them in front of you exhausted. You won't be able to use this planet's resources or influence until it is refreshed, which usually happens at the end of the round. There are no enemies to fight, and you don't have a space dock in that system, so we'll skip steps 6 and 7 of the activation order, and that means your turn is over. Each other player will take actions until it's your turn again, and then you're probably going to want to build some ships. So let's talk about that. You need a space dock to produce units, and right now the only one you have is in your home system, so that's the one you'll activate. None of the other steps of the activation sequence apply, so you'll skip right to step 7. Production is pretty straightforward. You simply take the units that you want to produce from your reinforcements and then place them on the board. Then you pay for them using the resources that your planets provide by flipping over the card, exhausting them. In your case, the planet Kinara provides 3 resources, and Trenlac provides 1 for a total of 4. Those planets you just colonized don't provide anything because they're still exhausted. Let's say you want to spread out really quickly. Well, for that, you're going to need another carrier and some more ground forces. If you look at your race sheet, you'll see a handy table that lists the costs of all units, as well as their combat strength, speed, and abilities. The carrier costs 3, and 2 ground forces cost 1 resource, so you have just enough. You spend resources by flipping your planet cards, and then placing your units on the board. The space dock itself is tied to a specific planet, so the ground forces you produce will go there. The location of your space dock is also important because it determines your production capacity, which is the resource value of the planet plus 2. That means that this space dock can produce 5 units in 1 turn. Keep in mind, even though the ground forces were purchased together for 1 resource, they still count as 2 units. You don't have to produce them 2 at a time, but if you only produce 1, it still costs 1 resource. Next, you might want to build a whole new space dock. You're probably not going to do that in your first round, so let's move the game forward a bit. This is the beginning of round 3. As you can see, you've settled some neighboring systems, built some more ships, and this one planet looks like a great place to set up a forward base of operations. The yellow player, playing as the Emirates of Hakan, have been encroaching into your territory, and even though he said it's fine, don't even worry about it, because just don't, well, for some reason you don't trust him. So let's get busy. There are a few prerequisites, so before you build a space dock, ask yourself these 3 questions. Have I controlled this planet for the entire round? Are there no other space docks on this planet already? Is the system free of enemy ships? If you said no to any of these, you can't build a space dock here. But if it's all yes, then go right ahead. You activate the system like we've done before, then pay 4 resources and build your shiny new space dock. Starting next round, you'll be able to produce new units here. There are a couple more bits about space docks, but I'm feeling a little hungry, so Nick's gonna talk about them while I get a sandwich.
Hey guys, so we got this unit called the space dock, but the thing is, it's not actually in space. Technically, the space dock is on the planet, which means it doesn't participate in space battles and can't be targeted by enemy ships. So what happens when there are enemy ships in your system, but not on your planet? When this happens, your system is under blockade, which means you can't build any ships. You can, however, build PDS units and ground forces. Next, Shay mentioned how carriers have the capacity to hold up to 6 ground forces, PDS units, and/or fighters, while space docks have capacity too. They don't need to hold ground forces or PDS units because those stay on the planets, but it can hold up to 3 fighters. Fighters, like ground forces, can be bought 2 at a time for 1 resource. Unfortunately, you can't split production and build 1 ground force and 1 fighter.
I hit the spot. Thanks.
Can I have a snack?
No, can I have a snack? No, get out. Okay, so we're going to talk about combat next, but first I need to introduce a couple quick concepts. I already talked about how once a system is activated, you can't activate it again as long as your command counter is there. Another thing to keep in mind is that any ships in an activated system can't leave that system, so the order in which you plan your turns is very important. Next, if you look at the ship section of your race sheet, you'll see that some ships have a speed of 2 instead of 1. Predictably, this means that they can move to systems that are 2 spaces away. You just activate the system and away they go. However, if there are enemy ships in the way, you can't move through them unless you have a specific technology. Also, even though you can't move out of an activated system, ships with a move speed of 2 or higher can move through an activated system on their way to their destination. Lastly, I want to introduce a couple of technologies. I'll be talking more about tech later on, but these 2 are pretty common and they come with some important rules of their own. First is XRD transporters, which increases the carrier's movement to 2. This is important not only because it's really good, but because it allows your carriers to pick up units on the way to another system. However, you can only pick up units in a non-activated system. Next is Deep Space Cannon, which allows your PDS units to fire on adjacent systems. This might not mean anything to you right now, but trust me, it's important. Okay, combat. Every unit except for the space dock has a combat value. What that means is whenever you fire a shot, you roll a d10, and if you get that number or higher, you score a hit. Whenever you do score a hit, the other player determines which of his ships takes the hit. This means that you'll probably be sacrificing your cheaper units, like fighters, to protect your more valuable ships. Going back to the activation sequence, we said that number 3 was PDS fire. Whenever a system is activated, a PDS unit in range can fire one shot at any ships in the activated system. Normally that just means the PDS units in that system, but if you have deep space cannon technology, PDS units in any adjacent system are within range. This means that you can activate a system just to fire on it with a PDS unit. Now let's get into the real meat of this beast, the combat. I've set up a scenario that will show you how combat works along with the special abilities of every unit. Now, when this is done, you will already know about 75% of this game. So take a look at the board now. This is about 6 rounds into the game, and as you can see, Yellow has been causing some problems. Fortunately, his forces are spread too thin, and the time is right for you to strike back. Hard. Don't give me that look, you knew this was coming. There are 2 concerns here. First is the Kornik Resculon system. Last turn, Yellow swooped in, destroyed that space dock we just built, and took your planets. You want them back, and I don't blame you, but he had to activate that system in order to do it, which means that his ships aren't going anywhere soon. Now, since you know you don't have to worry about them, you set your sights on the Bereg Lurta 4 system. One of the best systems of the game, and Yellow took it before you could? No. It's time to teach these space cats a lesson. Your strongest fleet just returned from a successful invasion into blue space, and you're in prime position to take this system. So let's see how you do it. Now, because the system is about to get flooded with ships, I like to move all the relevant pieces to the side. This has the added benefit of being able to put your ships in formation, which is cool. First, you activate the system, but not all of your ships can get there. So let's take a look at which ones can and which ones can't. So first is your Dreadnought. Movement of 1, it's right there, easy. Next is your War Sun, strongest ship in the game, and it has a movement speed of 2. It also has capacity 6, so let's bring some fighters and a ground force. Replace the ground forces on the empty planets with flags to remind everyone that you control them. Now, this cruiser and destroyer also have a move speed of 2, but because there are ships in the way, they can't get there. This other cruiser could, but its system is already activated, so it's stuck there. The only units that can still get there are this destroyer and, because you have XRD transporters, this carrier. Unfortunately, you can't bring both of them. Why? Because your fleet supply is currently at 3. Your fleet supply determines the maximum number of ships, not including fighters, that you can have in one system. If you try to bring more ships into a system, you have to destroy ships until there are only 3 left. You can change your fleet supply around during the status phase, but for right now, you're stuck with 3. In this situation, you're going to want the carrier with its ground force and fighters, and you can pick up an extra ground force on the way. You could bring this PDS unit as well, but these planets are basically undefended and you want to have some kind of invasion deterrent. So now that all the units are in place, let's get down to business. Like I said earlier, before the fight starts, each PDS unit gets 1 free shot. Since Yellow doesn't have deep space cannon, only this PDS can fire. Yellow rolls a d10 and gets an 8. The PDS has a combat value of 6, so that's a hit. You decide to lose a fighter because they're basically meat shields anyway. Now after that, the PDS unit doesn't participate in the fight. 1 shot might not seem like much, but it's got a few more tricks down the road. Next, we roll for the Yellow Destroyer's anti-fighter barrage. Before combat starts, each destroyer gets 2 free shots that can only target fighters. Now, the destroyer doesn't have a very high combat value, but it can be improved, and it's a good response to any player who has a strong fighter presence. Against all odds, Yellow scores 2 hits. Now the battle actually starts. Combat follows these 4 steps. Announce withdrawals retreats, roll combat dice, remove casualties, and execute withdrawals retreats. Yellow scored some good hits, but he knows he can't win this fight, so instead of going down guns a-blazing, he decides to retreat. In order to do that, you need to have an adjacent activated system, which he does. Before a retreat can happen though, we have to have a combat round. Both players roll dice for each of their ships and calculate hits. You can do this simultaneously or in turns, it doesn't really matter because all hits happen at the same time. It is important, however, to designate which ships you're rolling for since different ships have different combat values. So on Yellow's side, there are no more special abilities. The destroyer used his and hits on a 9 or higher. The fighters and cruiser don't have special abilities and they hit on 9s and 7s respectively. Let's say they score 2 hits. On your side, you have a fighter, a carrier, a dreadnought, and a war sun. The fighter and carrier aren't doing anything special, each of them hit on a 9. The dreadnought hits on a 5 and can sustain damage, which basically means it has 2 hit points. If it gets hit, you just turn it upside down. If it gets hit again, then it's destroyed. And now for the war sun. This thing hits on a 3. Not only that, it fires 3 shots. Not only that, it can also sustain damage. And it has another ability. We're going to get to that later. So with all of this firepower, you should blow Yellow completely out of the water. But for the purposes of this example, let's say you only get 3 hits. Next, you remove casualties. You scored 3 hits, so Yellow gets rid of the fighters and the destroyer. He scored 2 hits against you, so you need to choose where those hits are going. Now you might think you should just sustain damage on the Dreadnought and the War Sun and keep all of your ships, but there is a small chance that yellow has an action card that will destroy any damaged ships. I haven't talked about action cards yet. I'll get to that in a minute. The point is, that strategy can backfire on you. You don't want to lose any ground forces though, so you decide to lose the last fighter and just damage the Dreadnought. Yellow doesn't play a direct hit card, so we move on to the next step, execute withdrawals or retreats. Since he has one ship left, yellow has to move it to an adjacent activated system, which in this case is the Sowdor system. If yellow hadn't declared a retreat, you would continue these 4 steps of combat until at least one player has no more ships left in the system, either through retreat or defeat. If the attacking player has an adjacent activated system, he can declare a withdrawal, which follows the same rules as a retreat. In this scenario, you wouldn't be able to withdraw because you don't have an adjacent activated system. Also, if either player declares a withdrawal or retreat and then somehow destroys all of the enemy ships in that system, they can no longer execute that withdrawal or retreat. So now that you've won the space battle, it's time for planetary invasion. First, you decide which ground forces are going where. You can also bombard planets with dreadnoughts and war suns, so you need to decide which ship is attacking which planet. The PDS provides a planetary defense shield, which protects against the dreadnought's bombardment, but not the war suns. So let's use the war sun against this planet and the dreadnought against the other, with 2 ground forces landing on each. The PDS gets another free shot at the ground forces landing on its planet, so let's figure out these shots. The PDS scores a hit and destroys an invading ground force, but the war sun scores 3 hits and kills all of the ground forces on the planet. The PDS can't be a target though, so it isn't destroyed by the fire. The dreadnought was less successful and doesn't hit anything. You successfully land 1 ground force on Barrack, so that invasion automatically succeeds. Because of this, the space dock and PDS units are immediately destroyed, and you receive the planning card exhausted. The Lord of 4 invasion isn't going as well. You land 2 ground forces on the planet, and now you have invasion combat, which plays out exactly like space combat, except that neither side can withdraw or retreat. Ground forces hit on an 8, so let's say that after 2 rounds of combat, both sides have lost all units. When this happens, the original owner retains control. And that wraps up both combat and tactical actions. I know it was a lot, but like I said, that covers most of what you actually do in the game. Now, before we talk about strategic actions, which are what really make the game interesting, I'm going to let Nick tell you about transfer actions while I get a drink of water. Feeling a little parched.
Hello again. So, transfer actions are like a specialized tactical action. Let's take another look at the map. While we've made a strong attack, we've also left some other systems pretty weak. To fix this, on our next turn, we're going to make a transfer action. To do this, you activate 2 adjacent systems using 1 command counter from your command pool and the other from your reinforcements. Both systems must have at least 1 friendly ship and no enemy ships. Then you transfer ships from both systems. In this case, we just want to move the destroyer and cruiser from our home system. We could move the destroyer from the other system in, but we're leaving space for larger ships. Next, if any player has PDS units in range of either system, they can fire. After that, if ground forces are moved, they can land on their new planets. The last step is production, so you can produce units on one of the activated systems, but not both. Since the purpose of this was to shore up our defenses, let's build a PDS unit, a dreadnought, and hey, let's go nuts, our second war sun. You'll notice that there are only 2 war sun units per player, which means we can only have 2 on the map at a time. Each unit, other than ground forces and fighters, have a limited supply. There are extra tokens for fighters and ground forces that everyone can use if and when they run out of miniatures. The transfer action isn't as commonly used as the tactical action, but under certain circumstances it can be really effective, so don't forget about it.
Now that we're up to speed,
I'm so thirsty.
The last action we have to talk about is the strategic action. This is what really makes Twilight Imperium shine. See, in the beginning of each round, during the strategy phase, everyone in turn order will choose a strategy card. These normally work the same way. During your turn in the action phase, you can spend an action to use the primary ability of your strategy card. Then everyone else, in clockwise order, can do the secondary ability. Usually, in order to perform the secondary ability, you have to spend a command counter from your strategy allocation. The strategy cards also determine the turn order by the number on the card. Then next turn, you're going to pick new strategy cards based on that turn order. Now, with 8 cards and 6 players, some of these strategy cards inevitably will not get picked. When that happens, you'll take a bonus counter and place it on each card that isn't picked. The next time one of those strategies gets picked, the player who grabbed it receives 1 trade good for each bonus counter. I haven't talked about trade goods yet, but they're really good to have. Anyway, let's take a look at how the cards work themselves. We've got initiative, diplomacy, political, logistics, trade, warfare, technology, and imperial. I'm going to talk about them in reverse order, but I'll save Imperial for last because reasons. So we'll start with technology. I've already talked about a few technologies. Each race starts with a few. They provide passive and sometimes active bonuses that will help you in some way or another. And this strategy is how you get more of them. Now, in the back of the rule book, there's a map that shows you all of the technologies and their prerequisites. I recommend you take some time to look at this map before you play. Just become familiar with it, see which techs appeal to you. And at the end of the video, I'll also be posting some tips about how to navigate this web of science. But for now, just take notice that these arrows show which techs are prerequisites for others. Some techs have either or, while others require multiples. And then the ones without arrows have no prerequisites. Getting back on track, when you play the tech strategy card, you get a new technology for free. The secondary ability allows you to buy a technology for 1 command counter and 8 resources. 8 resources might sound like a lot, but there are ways to get discounts. You may notice that some planets have a red, blue, or green symbol next to them. These symbols correspond to different types of technology. Red is military, blue is propulsion, green is biological, and yellow is general. If you control one of these planets, you get a 1 resource discount on matching tech. These discounts stack, so if you have 3 or 4 of these planets, the discounts really add up. However, that discount only applies if the planet with the tech specialty is not exhausted when you buy the tech. You don't have to use the planet in order to get the resources to buy it, but if you do, you still retain the discount. Next is warfare. Now, despite its name, it's not purely aggressive. All the primary ability does is allow you to take one of your command counters off the board and put it back on your command pool. Now, remember all those times I told you that once a system was activated, you couldn't activate it again or move ships out of that system? This is the exception to that rule. Warfare effectively deactivates a system, which allows you to do a ton of things. Maybe you want to produce twice in one system, or move units that you just produced, move twice, maybe attack twice. You get the idea. Now, the secondary ability, I'm going to be honest, I don't think it's that good. You spend a counter from strategy, and you can move 1 or 2 destroyer or cruiser units to an adjacent empty, non-home system. I mean, you can use it to block a lane or provide minor defense, I guess, and it's not my favorite. Now, trade though. Trade is really good. Remember all those trade goods I was talking about before? Well, this is how you get those. These little tokens are very useful. You can exchange them for 1 resource or 1 influence each whenever you would spend either. So if you're buying a new technology or building ships, those trade goods can help you with that. You can also give the trade goods to other players at any time during the game for any reason. Maybe you want someone to settle planets near someone else, or you want them to vote with you at the political assembly, or you desperately need them to not attack you this turn. Trade goods are the only tangible form of bribery. So how do you get them? Well, the first way is through the primary ability of the trade strategy card. There are 2 options for the trade card. The first one lets you take 3 trade goods from the pot. Then you receive trade goods for all your open trade agreements, if you have any. And then you open up trade negotiations between all of the other players. And most importantly, you get to approve or reject all trade agreements that are made. So how do trades work? Well, at the beginning of the game, each player will receive 2 trade agreement cards, and these will have a number between 1 and 3 on them. While trade negotiations are open, you can trade one of these cards for 1 card of your opponent's. These won't always seem fair, but your agreements are worth nothing to you if you keep them to yourself, so it might be worth it to take a bad deal over no deal at all. Whenever you receive trade goods, simply add up the numbers on your active agreements and put that many trade goods on your race sheet. You can trade your agreements to different players, but you can't trade both of your agreements to the same player. So to recap, option A of the trade primary ability is gain 3 trade goods, gain trade goods from all of your active agreements, and open trade negotiations. And remember, you can deny anyone else's trades. This would be a great opportunity to use or request bribery. These trade agreements will remain in play until they are broken, either by the 2 players attacking each other, 1 player taking a planet from another player, or by either player declaring the trade agreement broken during the status phase, or through option B of the trade primary ability, which is to cancel all trade agreements. This is effectively flipping the table, but it can be very effective, especially if no one is trading with you. The secondary ability is to spend a command counter and receive trade goods for all of your active agreements. Note that you do not gain trade goods from any agreements made this turn. You'll have to wait until the next time trade is played in order to benefit. Next is logistics, and it's quick and easy. You use the primary ability and gain 4 command counters. You can put them anywhere. Not there. There. Secondary ability, you'll spend influence to buy command counters at a 3-for-1 rate. Influence is the red number on the right side of every planet. You spend influence the same way you spend resources, by exhausting the planet and flipping the card over. That means that if you use a planet's resources, you can't use the planet's influence, and vice versa. It's important to note that you don't need to spend a command counter in order to use Logistics' secondary ability. Number 3 is political, and it's a big one. The primary ability does 3 things. First, you draw 3 action cards. Then, you draw the top card of the political deck and resolve its agenda. And then you look at the next 3 cards and pick 2 of them to put on the bottom of the deck. During the game, you're going to be drawing action cards. These cards have a wide variety of benefits, and while there are a few repeats, there are also a ton of unique cards. The cards themselves will tell you when and how to play them. The only restriction is that you can't play 2 of the same card for the same benefit in one round. For example, there's a card called Morale Boost, and this card gives you a +1 bonus to combat rolls. You can't play 2 of this card for a +2 bonus in one round, but you can play 1 on one round and 1 on the next round for 2 consecutive +1 bonuses. When you want to play an action card, you announce your intentions by saying, "I'm going to play an action card." And if other players want to do so, they can chime in. Then reveal all cards and resolve their effects in turn order. The only exception to this is the Sabotage card, which can be played after any action card. And no, you cannot sabotage a sabotage. Some cards will say play as an action on them. Predictably, when you play one of these cards, you're doing it instead of a normal action. And lastly, you're only allowed to have 7 cards in your hand at any one time. If you're going to draw more action cards, then you'll have to draw and discard them one at a time. Okay, so that's action cards. Now let's get political. Throughout the game, you're going to be voting on political agendas drawn from the political card deck. And there are 2 types. There are elect votes, which require the players to pick one player to receive the benefits or penalties from that card, or there's for or against votes, which are pretty self-explanatory. Either of these can also be laws, which means that the card will stay in play for the rest of the game. After the active player draws a card and reads the agenda, then it's time for the other players to debate it in any ways they see fit. That can be reasoned arguments, bribes, threats, whatever you like. Just know that words are wind and nothing you say is actually binding. After discussion, the players start voting, starting with the player to the left of whoever has the speaker token and going clockwise. When voting, every player has a number of votes equal to the combined total influence of all of his unexhausted planets. Voting does not exhaust your planets, however, which is good because you're always going to have to use all or none of your votes. If there's a tie, then the speaker gets to decide the vote. Quick side note, I love the political cards. Even though the effects of them are usually terrible, they add so much flavor to the game, and if you're the kind of player who likes to roleplay your character, the assembly is the best place to do it. Oh yeah, and the secondary ability is spend a command counter and draw an action card. Yay. Next, we have Diplomacy. When you activate the primary ability, you select another player. Then, for the remainder of the round, neither of you can activate a system that contains units belonging to the other player. This is usually a defensive play, but it can be used aggressively if you think about it. The secondary ability is to spend a command counter and refresh 2 of your exhausted non-home planet cards. And now we get to number 1, Initiative. Initiative is a little different from the other strategy cards in that it has no primary or secondary ability. Instead, it has 2 passive abilities. First, it gives you the speaker token, which we talked about before. And second, remember how I said all the secondary abilities of the other strategy cards, except for Logistics, require you to spend a command counter from your strategy allocation? Well, if you have Initiative, you don't need to do that. You still have to pay resources for Technology's secondary ability, but all of the others are completely free. Now, because Initiative has no abilities, you don't need to take a strategic action before you pass during the action phase. And then there's just the added benefit of going first, which is especially important when you're picking strategy cards, because when you pick strategy cards first, you usually pick Imperial. Of course, to talk about Imperial, I first need to talk about winning the game. Okay, so I mentioned in the intro that every player is trying to prove themselves to the Winaran custodians who hold the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. Well, in order to do that, you're going to need to fulfill certain objectives that they'll put forth throughout the game. The first player to reach 10 points has successfully shown that they have what it takes to rule the galaxy. Those objectives are written on these objective cards. At the beginning of the game, you're going to randomly take 6 Stage 1 objectives, 3 Stage 2 objectives, as well as the Imperium Rex card, shuffle them and place them below the Stage 1s, and then place them next to the score track. You're also going to deal 1 secret objective to each player. Now let's go back to the Imperial card. When you activate its primary ability, you do 2 things. First, you reveal the next objective in the objectives deck, and then you score 2 points. The order of this is important because of that Imperium Rex card that I mentioned. As soon as that card is revealed, the game immediately ends. So if you were 1 point behind and you play the Imperial card and Imperium Rex is revealed, congratulations, you just got second place. If there's a tie, it's broken in this order: greatest number of resolved objectives, then most planets, then most unused command counters, then most counters on a race sheet. And if there's still a tie, the two races reluctantly agree to share the throne. The secondary ability of Imperial allows you to spend a counter to build units at a space dock without activating the system. You can also build units at a system that has already been activated. All other rules apply, but it's pretty good. Okay, so a public objective has been revealed and you qualify for it. How do you score points? Well, after everyone has passed during the action phase, we move on to the status phase. The status phase has 7 steps, but they go pretty fast. First, in turn order, each player can achieve one public objective and their secret objective if they qualify for it. Some objectives like this one will say, I now spend X, which means you will need to have that available during the status phase. Then spend it by flipping planet cards or turning in trade goods, or a combination of the two. You'll notice that stage 1 objectives are all worth 1 point, secret objectives are all worth 2, but stage 2 objectives can be worth 2, 3 points, or they can outright win you the game. You can only qualify for an objective once, so because of the nature of these cards, every game of Twilight Imperium will always last between 7 and 10 rounds. Lastly, keep your secret objective card secret until you qualify for it during the status phase. If you reveal it at any other time, or if you make a mistake and don't actually qualify for it when you try to, you lose it. So be careful. After that, you repair damaged ships, remove command counters, refresh planet cards, receive 1 action card and 2 command counters, redistribute your command counters, and then return strategy cards. Then you go back to the strategy phase and start a new round. We're almost done, so I'm going to take a little breather and I'm going to let Nick talk about building the galaxy.
Hello again. Let's take a look at the galaxy on turn 1. We've got Mechatol Rex at the center like it always is, 6 home systems at the corners of the map, and the rest we get to fill in before the game starts. It's kind of like a tactical minigame that often tells you which players you need to mercilessly destroy for placing the supernova right next to your home system. Which reminds me, before we get to placing the galaxy, we need to introduce you to the special systems. First, there are the red border systems, the supernova, the nebula, and the asteroid fields. The supernova is a roadblock. Can't activate it or move through it, period. The asteroids can't be activated either, but you can move through them if you have the technology anti-mass deflectors. You can activate the nebula and move ships in and out of it, but you can't move through it. Also, a ship leaving the nebula has its speed reduced to 1. Lastly, if a fleet is in a nebula and another fleet moves in, the defending fleet gets +1 to combat rolls. The last special systems are the wormholes. No matter where they are placed in the galaxy, these systems are considered adjacent to their matching wormhole systems. The only restriction is that PDS units can't fire through wormholes. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, let's build. First, place Mechatol Rex in the center. Then shuffle all the systems together and remove 2 random systems. Then deal 5 systems to each player and then roll to see which player will go first. There are 3 rules to placing systems. First, you have to finish each ring before moving on to the next ring, placing your home system in its designated spot when the second ring is completed. Second, you can't place a red system next to another red system unless you have no other options. And lastly, you can't place 2 systems without planets next to each other unless you have no other options. In either circumstance, you have to reveal your hand to show that you truly can't do anything else. When placing systems, start with the first player and go clockwise. When you get to the 6th player, he or she will place 2 systems, then go counterclockwise. It keeps reversing like that, 1 to 6, 6 to 1, 1 to 6, until all the systems are placed and you play the game. Shay? Shay?
And now you know how to play Twilight Imperium 3rd Edition. Or maybe you don't. Maybe you still feel a little confused or unsure. But that's okay. This is a complicated game. Honestly, it might take you a game or 2 to really feel comfortable. Or if it's everyone's first time playing, maybe you should just try a few dummy rounds. Just play, up to round 2 or 3 until everyone feels like they know what they're doing, and then just start over. One thing that's going to make it a lot easier for you, though, and this is something I can help with, is reference materials. Let me give you an example. This is the tech web that they provide, and as you can see, it's a bit of a mess. Yeah, it's pretty, but it's hard to follow. Well, this is something I found online. It's what I use. All the black X's are just for the expansions that I don't have. But as you can see, it's very linear. The basic text are at the top and it goes down, and it's a lot easier to follow. Things like that are just going to help you out. I also have sheets like this. This is just a bunch of handy rules, things that come up a lot, so you don't have to search through the rule book to find the answers for them. I can put links to all those materials as well as a couple others in the description box below. And lastly, there are a few things that I left out of this video intentionally. Mostly they're just different rules for playing with 3, 4, 5 players. There are a couple optional modules that the game has that I didn't feel were necessary. I just wanted to give you a basic understanding of how to play the game. And if you want to search through those modules and play with them, well, now you have a good foundation for which to explore that. But if you think that I missed anything, please let me know in the comments below, along with any Twilight Imperium stories or maybe some suggestions for future episodes of RTFM. In the meantime, please subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at RTFM Show or at Shay Says Words, and you can check out my other YouTube channel, 1020 Films. We do sketch comedies and short films. And join me next episode when we talk about Eldritch Horror.